G'day and welcome to the Make It Myles podcast. I'm Myles Clark, where we talk about all things related to building, construction and the real estate industry through the lens of a building inspector. This format is called The Shed. Outside of that, we also have The Journey. The Journey is more about personal development things, which I really thoroughly enjoy. It's made my life much better, and I think if we do spread the love, help everyone out, we all get better, the world gets better, fucking move on. Now, on this episode of The Shed, we'll be discussing things related to the proper ventilation of homes. Now, not a lot of people understand that homes need ventilation, for one. I'm talking about sort of key areas with regards to the subfloor and underneath the house and the cavities themselves, not specifically internally within the home itself, okay? Different topic, different ideas, different impacts, all those types of things. First things first, we want to talk about the why, and then we're going to go on to how the ventilation actually works, and then we'll finish up on what to do, how to manage it, how to mitigate it, how to fix it, all those good things associated with it, and then we'll sort of tie it all in together so it's all a nice, pretty bow. So first things first, why is it important? Now, ventilation in the home is important, and the reasons being is because poor ventilation is what leads to excessive mould growth under your home, within the wall cavities. It leads to obviously health conditions and health concerns, especially people that have respiratory issues. It's a big impact on them. And as well as that, it's also provides conducive conditions for termites. Okay, they love the moisture and they like the dark spaces, and when you combine all together, it makes it easy for them to come in, crawl through, go to town on your subfloor and cause absolute havoc. So how does ventilation work within the home? So there's a couple of things to consider in this situation. That first thing is the actual construction type of your home. All right, so we're just going to talk about the majority of homes. There's two types. You've got a slab-on-ground and then you've got a subfloor system. Okay, so it might be stumps, brick piers, whatever it is. You're walking through this area and underneath you have a cavity. Very simple, okay? We'll first start on the slabs themselves. It's because it's a pretty simple process, all right? There's no real issue underneath the slab itself, okay? What you really want to concern about ventilation is somewhat within the wall cavities themselves, okay? So we're going to talk about brick veneer structures, which is the most basic typical construction we have here in Australia, and that is the external brick, cavity, timber wall frame, plasterboard, boom, brick veneer, okay? Now, with brick veneer themselves, the bricks themselves, if you notice around the outside of the property, they have these little weep holes. Now, weep holes are for any moisture build up within that wall cavity, making its way out. Okay, that needs to be free-flowing as best as practicable. Now, does it have a massive impact on the home? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on what's occurring around the property, which we'll talk about later on. So that's basically how a brick veneer slab-on-ground ventilation would work in that situation. The other one is a property with a subfloor. Okay, so it has a cavity underneath the house itself. The flooring is most likely built of timber, bearers, timber, joists, flooring, some stumps, might be brick piers, whatever it might be, okay? If you've got like an older sort of home that's a brick veneer, you'll have external brick piers. So you have external brickwork all the way around, and then internally you have stumps and all that sort of stuff to support the rest of it, okay? If it's weatherboard, it's just stumps all the way around, weatherboards, crack on. Now, with regards to the ventilation in those types of areas, is we have something we call cross-flow ventilation. So this is just static vents, so there's no mechanical fans or anything like that. It's just vents. Air moves one way, air moves the other. As long as the air is moving around, that's going to help ventilate that space. Okay, that's going to reduce the risk of any sort of moisture sitting, pooling. It's going to reduce the conducive conditions for mold growth and things like that. Basically, that's how it works. All right. Now, what are the important things to consider about your property in particular and ensuring the ventilation is adequate? Now, it's pretty basic. It's covering up the vents. All right, because I see it all the bloody time, especially inspecting old homes for people that are going to purchase them, is the number one key issue is people putting garden beds around their house. All right. In most circumstances, we get a house built and then people don't really engage the builder to install garden beds and gardens and stuff like that. And over 30, 40 years, all those types of things, we end up sort of building decks, or we add garden beds and all this sort of shit around the house to make it pretty and make it all look good and all that sort of stuff. But what we're doing there is we're impacting the actual ventilation of the home itself. So if you're building a deck over it and you're enclosing the deck, obviously you're restricting that cross-flow ventilation underneath the home, because ideally the vent is going to be at finished floor level internally, and the vents are usually just a little bit below that, okay? So you can't be covering up all the vents around the property itself. Some people believe that these vents and these weep holes around the house are allowing the house to get cold, all right, when it's not the whole purpose of what these vents are for, okay? So don't block the vents up thinking that you're going to insulate your subfloor and it's going to warm up and you're going to keep your house warm. That's probably not a good idea. It's just going to result in these issues that can occur, which is the mold growth, okay, which is the conducive conditions for termites, and it's going to impact the soil, impact the materials, impact everything that you obviously don't want to impact. So covering the vents obviously is an issue that you need to get resolved sooner than later. Okay, so putting these garden beds around the house is going to fuck it. Building decks up against it is going to make it worse. Absolutely do not cover them, fill them in, anything like that. There's some other tactics you can do, especially with regards to older properties. I find this more with homes probably built 80, 90 years ago. These are the old school single front weatherboard homes. Now, the subfloor in these situations usually is so fucking low to the ground, and they've been built up over the years. They've got footpaths, all this sort of stuff, and they've got like one plinth board around the whole entire property. You can put vents in there as well, which helps that cross-flow ventilation. If you do struggle with access, because ideally you want 400 mil underneath your subfloor itself for obviously access for one, but also to allow for that ventilation. If you're very restricted and there's not a lot of space, what you can consider is actually adding in mechanical ventilation. All right, so all that was going to be is usually on two walls. So there's static vents, fans on one side, fans on the other, and these are just a very small, they're like a freaking computer fan. They're really bugger all, and they're quite quiet, to be honest. All they're going to do is they're going to extract the air. So they're going to pull the air out of that subfloor. So it's going to suck it in from the outside through the static vents, pull it through the subfloor, and then out the other side. And if you do two sides, it's going to pull that cross-flow ventilation, which is going to be fantastic. And I've done this numerous times. It's a very cost-affordable solution, which I was surprised about, to be honest, but it works an absolute treat. So that's something I would highly recommend you look into doing. Other impacts in regards to ventilation, you might find that your subfloor is very damp and there is mold growth on top of the soil and bits and pieces like that. You need to look into things like your drainage around the house, okay? Because everyone's been building up everything around the property, they've been building up with dirt and trying to cover all these bits and pieces. You'll find that the subfloor soil and the natural ground level outside the ground level is much higher than it is in the subfloor itself, okay? So you've got all this natural moisture just sitting within the soil itself. It's going to rain. Obviously, you can't control that. And that's going to work its way laterally through the wall. It might be plinth boards. If it is, it's going to be rot and decay and all this other horrible shit. If it's brickwork itself, you're going to get things like rising damp and issues like that as well, okay? So it's still, you're impacting that ventilation. You're impacting that ventilation within that subfloor area, because what it's doing, it's with all that moisture that's around, okay, the moisture is what's going to create that sort of mold, the conducive conditions for mold and as well as termites. So ensuring that your drainage around the house is adequate. So you might have adequate ventilation, but the drainage around the house might be the issue. Okay, so there's a couple of things in regards to that which you can do. Obviously, you can speak to a plumber. They can come out to site. They can check all your drains to make sure there's no leaks. That's a pretty obvious one. Or you could just add Aggie drains around the side of the property to ensure that no moisture is getting trapped through the property itself, and any sort of surface water and surface and general rainwater that comes and lands around the property, that is captured within the Aggie drain. So the Aggie drain captures the water. You've obviously got crushed rock and all those things. That's how the system works. Then it discharges it away from the property, which is the whole point of it. All right. What that's going to do is it's going to completely dry out that subfloor, because there's no impact of moisture getting in. The ventilation is adequate, and that's what's going to make probably the biggest impact. All right. So it is very critical in these situations that you understand how important the ventilation is within a property. Okay. Weep holes around the home, they are not to be siliconed up. They're not to be capped in or anything like that. If you're trying to mitigate vermin or rodents or things like that, you can put covers over them and all those types of things. As long as the air is moving through, that's the important part. And you don't want to obviously cover all these things for those specific reasons. It allows for the ventilation. And when you start covering all these types of things, it also creates areas for access for termites to get into as well, which is a pain in the ass, and it's something that needs to be mitigated to obviously mitigate that risk of termite damage, because termites can just eat a little bit of skirting board, or they can destroy half your fucking house, all right? It's ridiculous what they can do. So to recap, why is ventilation important? It's important because it's designed like that. It needs to occur. How does it work? We've already spoken about that. The cross-flow ventilation is the key, all right? If you have areas that are restricted, you've built a house up against it, or it's a neighbouring property, or it's a deck, or whatever it might be, you can then add things to help that ventilation, mechanical ventilation, help draw that air through, which is a very important thing to consider if you are struggling with like all these types of things. As well as that, ideally, one of the steps you need to take is to check all your drainage. Okay, when that moisture is getting through, that is what is causing these issues such as the mold growth and the conducive conditions. Tick those boxes. Sweet. All good with that. Check the ventilation is adequate. If it's not adequate with just static vents, add mechanical vents. Step back, assess what you've done. Now you're fucking giving your house an extra 15, 20 years of life. You've mitigated the risk of mold and health conditions. You've mitigated the risk of conducive conditions for termites, and you're setting yourself up for actually, quality home for the future, okay? Because there's not a lot of people that maintain their properties. There's not a lot of people that understand these impacts on the property itself. So be completely aware of that. Sort it out. action it out. If this episode has provided any value whatsoever, give us a share or a like or a review or whatever you want to do, and we appreciate your help, and we will see you on the next one.